The descent was chaos, alarms shrieking as fire chewed through metal, the shuttle spinning into the alien sky like a wounded bird. He gritted his teeth, strapped in as the world outside blurred in streaks of red and silver. Impact came with bone-rattling violence, tearing him from consciousness. When his eyes opened, silence pressed heavy. Smoke rose in pale ribbons from twisted wreckage. He pushed himself upright, ribs aching, the visor cracked but holding. The air was thin, bitter, carrying the scent of ash. A broken landscape stretched before him. Jagged cliffs, seas long since drained into skeletal basins, and strange towers that pulsed faintly with inner light. Each breath burned, but he moved, scavenging supplies, forcing strength into weary limbs. Survival came first, yet something deeper gnawed, an awareness that this place was not dead, only waiting. Stumbling through fields of brittle stone, he reached structures that defied reason. Walls flowed like frozen rivers, half-organic, etched with runes that shimmered dimly. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the echo of his boots. Then a presence. She emerged from shadows tall and regal, her form both graceful and terrifying. Skin like starlight drained of brilliance, eyes carrying centuries, a voice soft yet resonant with command. He raised his guard, yet her gaze pierced through. She studied him, not as prey, but as puzzle. When she spoke, the words pressed into his mind more than ears. "You are human," she whispered, as though tasting the syllables. "New to this galaxy, yet ancient in your will." Her admission followed, quiet and heavy. She was queen, immortal by necessity, but time had worn her. Her people had withered, drained of vitality, their world collapsing into dust. A sacred bond was needed to ignite survival, yet she herself was too far gone. The burden she carried could no longer be passed through her own flesh. Her eyes dimmed with sorrow as she leaned forward, the words almost trembling. "I am too ancient for you, human, but my daughter awaits you." The phrase lingered like a spell, equal parts promise and sentence. She told him the truth of her dying realm. Generations had been consumed by waiting for a chance, for an outsider whose strength might fuse with theirs. He was not chosen by design, but by survival's cruel lottery. His presence meant a path existed. Refusal would mean extinction. Acceptance would alter both his fate and theirs. He felt the weight settle across his chest, heavier than the crash, heavier than the barren sky. The queen's shadow loomed long in the dying light, her whisper now a command. And beyond the vast hall, in chambers unseen, the daughter stirred, destiny breathing down the neck of a man who had only wanted to live another day. She emerged like a fragment of starlight torn into flesh, the daughter the queen had promised. Her presence was sharp, not the weary solemnity of her mother, but something restless, unyielding. Eyes fractured like nebulae, hair shifting as though alive, she looked upon the human with disdain rather than awe. Her first words were laced with challenge, not welcome. She questioned why a fragile creature of flesh and bone should bear the weight of survival for an empire older than stars. He answered not with grandeur but honesty. He had no destiny, only will, and will had carried his kind through void and fire alike. The queen spoke of prophecy, of sacred bonds that could preserve their race, but the daughter's voice cut like iron. She would not be chained by ancient decrees, nor made a vessel for legacy she had never chosen. The hall trembled with the clash of their words, her defiance sparking against her mother's weary authority. The human stood between them, silent, listening as echoes of duty and rebellion collided. When her gaze turned back to him, it was sharpened into suspicion. He was no savior to her. He was a test, an intruder, a variable in equations she did not trust. Yet the harshness softened when survival demanded action. Beyond crumbling corridors, machinery of her people lay dormant, broken by time and neglect. She set tasks before him, daring him to fail. He mended what he could with tools salvaged from his wreck, patched life into systems that had not stirred for centuries. She watched, first with scorn, then with reluctant intrigue. His methods were crude, unrefined compared to their forgotten science, but effective. Where her kind had waited for prophecy, he built with bare hands, stitched hope from scraps. In him she saw not power, but persistence, a resource her people had long abandoned. Hours stretched into days, the silence between them filled with labor and unspoken questions. She challenged him in words and actions, testing whether humanity's defiance was more than fragile pride. He bore the weight without complaint, his answers delivered not by promise but by deed. Slowly, tension bent into recognition. She learned the human carried scars of his own world, battles fought against impossible odds. In his persistence, she found reflection, not prophecy fulfilled but survival embodied. Whispers of danger intruded upon fragile understanding. The daughter spoke of the Hollow Ones, kinsmen who had chosen decay over change, who vowed to let the last ember of their race gutter out rather than be reignited through alien blood. Their shadows crept closer with each passing hour, patient and hungry. Her warnings were not threats but truths, and in them he heard the edge of inevitability. The union was no longer about choice alone. It was a line drawn between extinction and defiance. The queen's eyes grew dimmer each day, her strength fading into silence, while the daughter stood caught between legacy and freedom. And the human knew the weight of decision would soon fall upon him, not as prophecy decreed, but as survival demanded. The air grew heavier with every passing hour, a silence that felt watched. The daughter's warnings proved true when the Hollow Ones descended from the fractured horizon. They were kin twisted by entropy, skeletal forms cloaked in shadows, their eyes burning with devotion to death. They did not come as supplicants but as executioners, intent on ensuring that no bond would ever ignite rebirth. To them, extinction was purity, and defiance was betrayal. The first clash came sudden, blades of bone striking against steel salvaged from the wreck. The human moved not with elegance, but with desperation, every strike forged from instinct. He was fragile in body, yet unyielding in spirit, turning debris into weapons, traps, and shields. Where his enemies sought to overwhelm, he improvised, shaping survival into advantage. The daughter watched, astonishment breaking through her defiance, as this lone figure fought with nothing but grit and resourcefulness. His resolve was not prophecy, it was human defiance carved into motion. They fought together, her strength of alien lineage entwined with his ingenuity. He turned rubble into snares, used gravity itself as an ally, striking where they were weakest rather than strongest. When her power faltered, he stood before her, bloodied yet unbroken, shielding her with a body far too fragile for the blows it absorbed. She saw in him what her people had long forgotten, that survival was not born from destiny, but from sacrifice, courage, and refusal to surrender. The queen entered the fray with the last of her strength. Her presence was like a dying star, brilliant yet fleeting. Energy radiated from her form, burning shadows into ash, unraveling Hollow Ones with a single gesture. Yet the effort cost her more than her body could sustain. She staggered, her light dimming, and her final words carried both command and plea. Choose life. Choose her. With that, the last radiance of her being flared, consuming her and scattering the enemy in waves of fire and silence. The battlefield fell still, the queen's form collapsing into nothing but dust and memory. The daughter knelt, grief etched into every motion, yet within her sorrow was a shift. The human's blood stained the stones where he stood, but he did not bow to despair. He reached for her, not as conqueror nor as chosen, but as ally. Together they rose amid the ruins, staring at the horizon where remnants of the Hollow Ones lingered in retreat. Their queen was gone, but her final whisper lingered in the air, heavy as prophecy, yet lightened by choice. For the first time, the daughter looked at him not as an intruder, nor as a pawn, but as something else, an equal burdened with the same weight of survival. The world around them trembled in quiet ruin, but within that ruin sparked the faintest thread of renewal. The queen's sacrifice had not ended their struggle, it had only passed the torch. And in the silence after battle, the human understood that destiny was not what he had been handed, it was what he now had to forge. The ruins still smoldered, the last embers of the queen's light fading into silence. The daughter stood in that emptiness, her breath sharp with grief, her eyes heavy with questions. She confessed her fear, not of the Hollow Ones, not of death, but of the chains of prophecy that had bound her since birth. She had never wanted to be a vessel, never wanted her life written by words carved in stone. Now, with her mother gone, she feared she would become nothing more than an echo of commands she had never chosen. The human listened, his own body marked with wounds, his voice steady in reply. Humanity, he told her, had never been guided by prophecy. They survived by choice, by stubborn will, by stepping into the unknown even when every star above screamed no. Survival was not destiny. It was defiance. Her doubt lingered, but so did the weight of silence around them. The Hollow Ones were scattered but not destroyed, the planet still broken, their people still dwindling. Without decision, everything would collapse into ash. The choice pressed between them, acceptance or abandonment, survival or extinction. She looked at him, searching for hesitation, but found none. He had no claim to her world, no bond to her blood, yet he stood unflinching before fate itself. His hand extended not as a chain, but as a promise. He chose her, not because prophecy demanded it, but because he would not let death win unchallenged. She accepted, not as prisoner of a legacy, but as partner in a new path. The pact was sealed not in ceremony, but in resolve. Something within her stirred as his presence touched hers, a spark igniting where emptiness had lingered. Power flowed, not ancient and weary, but renewed, fierce, alive. The air shifted, the ground trembled, and faint green pushed through cracks of barren stone. Life, fragile and stubborn, returned its first whisper to the surface of a dying world. She stood taller now, eyes burning brighter, her voice steadier than it had ever been. Where once she had been only air, now she was foundation. The human felt the change ripple outward, not magic, but something far more profound, hope woven into flesh, struggle turned into rebirth. Around them, the silence of the world was no longer empty. It was waiting. The planet would not be healed in days or centuries, but with each choice, with each act of survival, it would rise again. He looked at the horizon, battered but unbroken, and for the first time did not feel stranded. He was not lost among ruins. He was bound to a future, tied to a people who would endure because they refused to vanish. The daughter at his side was no longer burdened by prophecy, and he no longer carried only the will to survive for himself. Together, they carried the fire of two worlds. The queen's whisper echoed through memory, her command fulfilled, but in a way even she had not foreseen. Survival had never been granted. It had been earned. And now, as dust settled over broken stone, they stood not as relics of a dying race, but as the first spark of its rebirth. The human's final thought was quiet, certain, carved into the marrow of existence itself. Extinction is not our fate, not today, not tomorrow. We will endure. Together.